Growing up in the 1960s was a completely different world, slower, simpler, and full of moments that shaped an entire generation. From playing outside until the streetlights came on to watching black and white television as a family. Childhood in the 60s was defined by shared experiences, imagination, and rapid cultural change. In this video, we take a deep nostalgic journey back to the 1960s and explore 10 forgotten memories that many people today can hardly imagine. These are the everyday details of life that history books often skip, but those who lived it remember vividly. You'll rediscover what television meant before streaming and on-demand asterisk. Why kids had so much freedom growing up asterisk. How Cold War fears quietly shaped childhood asterisk. The music that changed everything forever asterisk. School, life, fashion, toys, and neighborhood culture asterisk. How civil rights and world events entered living rooms asterisk. Why life felt slower but more connected, whether you grew up in the 1960s or simply love learning about the past. This video will bring back powerful memories and reveal how much life has changed in just a few decades. Sit back, relax, and take a step back in time. First, let's remember a time when television was an event, not just background noise. In the 1960s, families didn't have hundreds of channels to flip through. Most homes had access to just a few major networks, say ABC, NBC, and CBS. This scarcity created a powerful, shared cultural experience. When a show like Asterisk, The Ed Sullivan Show, Asterisk, or Asterisk, The Twilight Zone, Asterisk, aired, it felt like the entire country was watching together. Families would gather in the living room, often planning their entire evening around a favorite program. Missing an episode wasn't a minor inconvenience. It meant you might never see it again, unless you were lucky enough to catch a summer rerun. Many households still relied on black and white television sets, their bulky wooden frames making them a central piece of furniture. The broadcast day itself had a definitive end. Late at night, stations wouldn't switch to endless infomercials. They would sign off completely, often by playing the national anthem over an image of a waving flag. The screen would then fade to static, a quiet signal that the day's entertainment was over. This ritual reinforced the idea that television was a scheduled, finite part of life, a far cry from today's endless, on-demand stream of content. Next, imagine a world where kids played outside until the streetlights came on. This wasn't just a saying. It was the unwritten rule of childhood. From morning until dusk, children had the freedom to roam their neighborhoods with a level of independence that seems almost unbelievable today. Parents rarely knew their kids' exact whereabouts, trusting that they were somewhere within the general vicinity, exploring, playing, and learning to navigate the world on their own. The outdoors was a vast, unsupervised playground where friendships were forged and adventures were created from scratch. A bicycle was more than just a toy. It was a vehicle of freedom, a status symbol, and your primary mode of transportation. It could take you to a friend's house blocks away, to the local creek to search for tadpoles, or simply on an aimless ride around the block. Kids invented their own games on the spot kick, the can stickball, or elaborate scenarios with simple, unspoken rules. The only curfew was the warm yellow glow of the streetlights flickering on at twilight. That was the universal signal that it was time to head home for dinner, your day of adventure complete. School life was also profoundly different, stricter in some ways, yet simpler in others. The classroom of the 1960s was an environment of order and authority. Desks were often bolted to the floor in neat, symmetrical rows, facing the teacher and the large, green chalkboard at the front of the room. High-tech educational tools consisted of overhead projectors and film strips, which would be threaded into a machine with a distinctive click-clack sound as each frame advanced. The teacher's authority was rarely, if ever, questioned. Parents typically sided with the school, and corporal punishment, such as a rap on the knuckles with a ruler, was still an accepted form of discipline in many places. There were also clear, often unspoken, differences in expectations for boys and girls. Boys might be steered toward shop class, while girls were guided to home economics, learning skills deemed appropriate for their future roles. The curriculum was straightforward, focused on core subjects, and delivered with a sense of formality that has largely disappeared from modern education. School was a place for structured learning, where discipline and respect were just as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic. Beneath the surface of this seemingly idyllic childhood, the specter of the Cold War loomed. Fears of nuclear conflict were an undeniable part of growing up. Children became familiar with the concept of nuclear war at a surprisingly young age, not through abstract discussions, but through tangible routine drills. Schools regularly practiced duck and cover exercises, where students would crouch under their desks, a grim and ultimately futile preparation for a nuclear blast. Public buildings, from post offices to schools, were marked with the distinct black and yellow signs for fallout shelters, a constant, silent reminder of the threat. News reports about the Cuban Missile Crisis, or tensions with the Soviet Union, were broadcast into living rooms, and even if kids didn't understand the complex geopolitics, they could sense the anxiety in the voices of news anchors and the worried expressions on their parents' faces. This undercurrent of fear coexisted strangely with the everyday normalcy of childhood. One moment you'd be playing outside, and the next you'd be practicing how to survive an atomic bomb. It was a peculiar duality that shaped the psychology of a generation. But the 1960s were also a time of explosive cultural change, and nothing embodied this more than the music. The arrival of the Beatles on * The Ed Sullivan Show * in 1964 wasn't just a musical performance. It was a cultural earthquake that sent shockwaves across the nation. This new wave of rock and roll, with its loud guitars and rebellious energy, thrilled teenagers and deeply worried their parents. Music suddenly became a powerful tool for defining one's identity and expressing a sense of rebellion against the established order. The primary way to discover new songs was the radio. Kids would listen for hours, waiting to hear their favorite track, ready to memorize the lyrics by heart. Music was more than just background sound. It was the soundtrack to a social revolution. It gave voice to the frustrations, hopes, and dreams of a generation grappling with war, civil rights, and a rapidly changing world. From the folk anthems of Bob Dylan to the psychedelic rock of Jimi Hendrix, music began to carry messages of protest, love, and liberation, creating a cultural divide between the young and the old. The world of toys was also fundamentally different, relying heavily on imagination rather than electronics. Before video games and digital gadgets, most toys were mechanical or required active, creative play. A simple cardboard box could be transformed into a spaceship, a fort, or a race car with a little ingenuity. Board games like *, Monopoly, *, Life, and *, Clue, * were staples of family nights, bringing everyone together around the dining room table for hours of shared fun and friendly competition. Toy guns, cowboy holsters, and army helmets were common playthings for boys, who would stage elaborate battles in their backyards. Girls played with dolls, dreaming up intricate stories and social scenarios. The value of a toy wasn't measured by its features or its technological sophistication, but by its potential to spark creativity. In the 1960s, a child's imagination was the most powerful plaything of all. In an era before the 24/7 news cycle and social media, the news was a trusted and shared experience. Evening news anchors like Walter Cronkite were considered figures of immense authority and credibility. When they spoke, the nation listened. Families would gather together to watch the evening news, a daily ritual that kept them informed about the world. This was how major events became collective experiences, felt and processed by millions of people simultaneously. The news wasn't just information. It was a shared narrative that bound the country together. This was also the first time that the brutal realities of war were broadcast directly into American living rooms. Graphic images from the Vietnam War brought the conflict home in a way that had never happened before, shocking viewers and fueling the growing anti-war movement. The daily newspaper, delivered to the doorstep each morning, was another essential source of information, providing in-depth coverage and a tangible connection to the events of the day. Fashion in the 1960s was a mirror reflecting a world in transition. The decade began with the conservative styles of the 1950s, still in place, but it ended with an explosion of expressive and rebellious clothing. The introduction of the miniskirt and bell-bottom jeans sent shockwaves through the older generation, who saw these new styles as a sign of moral decay. For the youth, however, fashion became a powerful form of self-expression and a way to signal their alignment with the counterculture. For many children, clothing was more practical than fashionable. Hand-me-downs were a common reality, passed from older siblings to younger ones. There was also a clear distinction between school clothes, which were often more formal and neat, and play clothes, which were older and more durable, meant for getting dirty. As the decade progressed, this rigid distinction began to blur, as personal style started to matter more than conforming to old-fashioned rules. The fight for civil rights was not just a distant political issue. It was a movement that shaped the awareness of children from a young age. Kids saw the protests, the marches, and the sit-ins on their television screens. The concept of segregation wasn't an abstract historical topic. It was a contemporary reality being openly discussed and challenged in their communities and on the national stage. The assassinations of leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and John F. Kennedy were deeply traumatic. Events that left a lasting impact on young minds, shattering a sense of safety and innocence. These events brought conversations about equality, justice, and fairness into homes across the country. Children were learning about social change not just in textbooks, but by witnessing it unfold in real time. The idea that ordinary people could stand up and demand a better, more just world felt real, urgent, and incredibly powerful. Finally, looking back, life in the 1960s felt slower, but also more connected. In a world without instant messaging or email, communication required patience. People wrote letters, sealing their thoughts in an envelope and waiting days or even weeks for a reply. A long-distance phone call was a significant event, often kept brief due to the expense. This slower pace of interaction fostered a different kind of connection, one that was perhaps more deliberate and meaningful. That sense of connection extended to the community as well. Neighbors knew each other by name, and kids played freely between houses. Life felt less scheduled, with more room for spontaneity and unstructured time. Childhood itself seemed to stretch on, long and vivid, filled with experiences that were deeply shared with family, friends, and the entire neighborhood. It was a time of profound change, both daunting and exhilarating, leaving an indelible mark on all who lived through it. Did you grow up in the 1960s? Share your memories in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. If you enjoy nostalgic history videos, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more journeys into the past.